Joining me is Adam Giles, the former Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, now Chief Executive Gina Rinehart's two key farming businesses, Hancock Agriculture and the legendary S. Kidman & Co. Adam Giles, thank you so much for joining me. Well, now this latest protest outside Parliament House in Melbourne, there seems to be a real anger growing in the bush at some of the global warming policies that are now hitting them. And this is even before the Albanese government has released its new plans for farmers to slash their emissions.
Well, it's interesting to see this protest. It's come out of the blue a little bit. As part of Hancock Agriculture and our partnership with News Corp on the Bush Summit, we've been talking to farmers around regional Australia, most notably last week in Tamworth, Perth yesterday, Port Lincoln today. And one of the things that's coming up, a little bit surprisingly, but faster than expected, is this white-hot anger against wind towers and transmission lines. And it's not just the aesthetical component that people are unhappy with, it's the transmission lines and the wind towers taking away pristine agricultural farming land. It's the environmental impact that it has and all the hazards that it puts into the ground. There's the issues around the recyclable nature and what happens to those wind towers later on. But I think one of the key components is the stealth in which they come onto farming land and to regional communities, compulsorily acquiring areas where those transmission lines go and where those wind turbines are physically situated. And that's a white-hot anger, and it's really energising regional Australia and pushing back. And it's not to say that people in regional Australia aren't for a cleaner, greener regional Australia. We all want to be part of that, but net zero with the transmission wires and the wind turbines are a blunt instrument that's coming firmly on the shoulders of particularly farmers in regional Australia, and we're being expected to bear the brunt of net zero on behalf of the government and the 86% of people who live in those capital cities.
Yeah, and I would also like to hear far more discussion of the risk, the fire risk posed by the wind generators and all these wires strung across the country. I don't think we've heard enough about that as well. Now, this, of course, that's just one issue. You've got the government saying that it's going to be developing plans now to get farmers and graziers to reduce their emissions, like emissions from stock and all that kind of thing. In total, how do you think these global warming schemes are going to affect farmers, and what sort of position are they in to absorb the costs and regulations?
Well, I can only talk to it from the perspective of Hancock Agriculture and S. Kidman, and Mrs. Rinehart yesterday in Perth outlined it quite well when she said, in our company, we're investing $600,000 per homestead in converting them into a solar hybrid diesel backup system. We're purchasing electric motorbikes, we're trialling electric cars, we're putting solar bores on every one of our bores, and we're spending a lot of money. But not every farmer in Australia can do that. Not every farmer is backed up by a major mining company with deep pockets. The average farmer in Australia can't afford to put in place the practices of net zero on their own farm. And I heard yesterday in Perth a farmer get up and say that him and his wife and his son on their farm, they feed 5,000 people. But now they're being told, you're not doing enough. You've now got to go and spend $200,000, $300,000, $500,000 to put in net zero practices on your farm. We all want to be part of the solution in supporting this change, but there are elements that are targeting our mass producers of food and fibre and energy in this country that is going to have a detrimental effect and drive people off their properties. And that's why you're seeing protests in places like Melbourne today with the tractors turning up.
I think that's absolutely correct. I've been monitoring this for some time now, and it's just getting, there's more and more opposition in the bush to these things. I mean, they're horrible to look at.
But it's not just that, Andrew. Mate, I was just going to say, it's not just that. Regional Australians deal with many things. We deal with the worst roads in the country, the worst bridges, poor access to infrastructure. We've got continuing reduction in services such as medical, with maternity services and birthing services being taken out of the region and put in capital cities. Education keeps being drawn back by Treasury officials who find it cheaper to deliver those services in the bush. And then you have this uncertainty about net zero coming onto the regions, the environmental damage and impact that wind towers and transmission lines has, the challenges it places on sacred sites. Then you have the cultural heritage in Western Australia, which has been repealed, but every farmer and every regional Australian knows if the voice gets up, this is going to be nationalised and there'll be cultural heritage acts all across Australia. This is uncertainty. So we deal with the everyday challenges of regional lifestyle with lack of infrastructure and services. We deal with exchange rates, interest rates going up, commodity pricing challenges, and then we have the Voice, Cultural Heritage Act, net zero. It is just getting too much and people have had enough.